Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is Matt Gayer, Co-Executive Director at the Catalog for Philanthropy. We're talking about donor identities and donor-centric language today, how to use those to drive support, especially at this time of the year. We're going to give everyone just another minute here to hop on, just one more minute, then we'll get started. Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of y'all that just hopped on, my name is Matt Gayer, Co-Executive Director at the Catalog for Philanthropy. We'll be talking about donor identities and donor-centric language today. A couple things to note before we begin. You should be able to see our slides right now, hear our audio. If you have issues with either of those today, just let us know. We'll try to address those as quickly as we can. If you have any questions throughout the day, feel free to ask those in the question box. We'll answer those as they come up or at the end of the webinar today. We will send out a copy of the slides and recording shortly afterwards. So you will receive a copy of the slides and recording shortly after the webinar, along with a very short evaluation, less than a minute long to fill it out. We really appreciate you taking the time to do so. So today we'll talk about a few specific tips about how to tap into donor identities, what donors are looking for out of their giving relationship, as well as how to sharpen the language we're using in our appeals to really motivate donors to give. Before we kind of dive into those specific tips, I just want to talk about where we find ourselves with individual donors right now towards the end of 2022. A couple things. One, we still see donors be really active right now. Donors, especially major donors, are still giving at relatively high levels. The overall data on individual donors is very strong in terms of giving, although we do see that giving and increased giving really be concentrated at the top. So major donors are giving at a really high level, but middle level and grassroots donors are actually slowing their giving a bit. This is for a variety of reasons, including economic uncertainty. So we want to make sure that all of our donors across that spectrum, but especially our major donors, really feel like they're making a difference with their gift. We also see across that spectrum from grassroots to major donors, the donors are really looking for a sense of community when giving. This started during the pandemic, but has continued through. So donors really want to feel like it's a collective action. They don't want it to feel individualistic or transactional. And the other thing donors are looking for, as we already mentioned, is real impact and progress with their gift, right? There's a lot of issues in the community they could be supporting, a lot of challenges we're facing as a community and will be for a while. So if they're making a gift, they want to make sure it's a worthwhile investment in the community. So at the same time, and it's an interesting juxtaposition, while we're seeing donors be really active and giving at decent levels right now, we expect end of year to go pretty well across the sector and for most organizations. Donors are also reporting that they are tired and exhausted, probably like many of us today. So we want to think about how are we going to excite this group, get them engaged, knowing that they have so much on their plate, right? And how do we kind of keep them feeling really active there? And then finally, we do see donors, one trend, especially for kind of middle level donors, but for major and grassroots as well, asking about systems, asking about how our daily work rolls up to some of these systemic issues, these issues of equity and justice and power in our community. So wanting to make sure that that's a little more present in our fundraising appeals this year than maybe it has been before in many cases. Obviously, it depends on your audience, but we're seeing a lot of donors really confronted with that and now wanting to make a difference in it and see their gift within that. So with that, we'll dive into the tips, and the first is about donor identity. So a lot of times when we think about the giving relationship that exists between a donor and a nonprofit, we see it as a really one-way street, right? Donors give us money, we say thanks, right? It's them giving us everything, us giving very little back, right? Other than, some gratitude through our stewardship efforts. In reality, this is more of a two-way street, or should be more of a two-way street. Donors are giving money, what we're giving back to them is a sense of self, is a sense of accomplishment, right? They're getting an emotional reward or an identity reward by giving, right? There's some self-actualization going on the donor's part by donating to your organization. So we want to think about how do we tap into that, how we tap into what donors want to see themselves as to make sure they feel engaged and excited about giving us a gift. So there's a few identities we see really be top of mind for donors right now. We'll talk about how each impacts your appeal. So some of your donors may be giving because they really see themselves as a change agent, right? So these are folks that want to give, and by giving, they really want to drive impact, right? So this is going to be, if you think you have a lot of change agent donors, or that seems like a profile that feels common to your donor base, you're going to make sure you use really donor-centric language that talks about them making the difference. So it's not that they're giving a gift to help you help kids in the DC area. It's that by giving, they are helping kids in the DC area, right? We want to put them at the center of that story. And that's what we see for the change agent is really going to drive their giving behavior. And it's going to help them, again, self-actualize that they're doing something good and meaningful in the community. I will say for those organizations, especially in the DC area that are on the call today, we have a lot of folks, right, that are very kind of actively invested in the community, but may not be working directly in the social good field, right, or in the public sector. So we have a lot of folks who actually do want to kind of live vicariously through your work a little bit with their donation. So we want to tap again into putting them at the center of that story. That's really going to motivate them to give. The second bucket, this is the helper, right? So this is folks who are donating because it's a good thing to do, right? This is maybe values-based for them. It could be, something they saw their family do growing up. So these are folks that are doing it because it's something good, and they're going to be motivated by those impact stories. Excuse me, those impact stories. So really sharing those stories of how individual clients are benefiting from the work being done. That's really going to be what motivates them, and they see themselves as helping others, right? So really want to tap into that. A third identity, and that's really peaked over the last couple of years and then waned a little bit, but now is back at top, and we can all probably kind of understand why, is that protester identity for a donor. So donor is giving a gift to you in order to fight back against something. They're fighting back against popular narratives that are happening in the media or politics. They're fighting back against systems or inequitable power imbalances, whatever it might be. By giving to you, it's an act of protest, an act of defiance. So what we want to do there to tap into that for donors, if we think that's going to be part of our base that's giving, is really making sure we're using some of that systems language. We're using that language that we're out here kind of protecting opportunities, right, or defending our community, et cetera. And that's going to be what really motivates those donors to give this year. Our fourth identity, and I would say this is probably the identity that least is relevant for smaller nonprofits. We do see this be very important for medium-sized and larger organizations, but especially for most community-based groups, that's probably the least out of these six, is the celeb, right? So they're giving because it's what, quote, cool people do, right? They're giving because they saw celebrities make donations. They're giving because they know their friends are giving, so it'll be seen as a giver as well as part of the identity for them. What we're going to do if we think that is relevant, and sometimes it is wanting to make sure it's really easy for folks to, for instance, share their gift on social after they make it, right? Really easy ways to get recognized on our website, things like that. So it doesn't have to be over the top with the recognition, but just giving them some easy opportunities to share on social, to be recognized on our site, etc., is going to tap into this. Again, this is the least common one we see for smaller organizations, but one to think about nonetheless. The fifth one here, active citizen, is going to be somewhat similar to the change agent one, but these are folks who are giving because they see it as part of their kind of quote unquote civic duty, right? As an active member of the community, they think that they should be invested in the community. And not surprisingly, given that sentence, the impact on language we have here of this sounds like our donors, is that we want to talk about community a lot for these folks, right? So really talking about how the organization exists in community, how they're giving in community in concert with others, and really making sure that they feel like this is a collective effort for a collective goal, right? And really making them part of something. And then finally, the last identity, and this one sometimes gets confused with helper, is caretaker. And the only difference here is that These are folks that are giving because they want to specifically help a certain group of people, a certain community, etc. Often they have some type of shared identity. They might be from the community originally. Maybe they work directly there, right? This is also often folks that are in the public sector who are also donors themselves fall in this category. And again, the impact here is very similar on our pitch as it is with helper. We want to share those impact stories, those impact stats, some information about who we're serving in terms of our audience is going to be important there for that caretaker group. So our next tip here is around language itself, right? The language we're using in our appeals. So going beyond just tapping the donor motivation and identity we just talked about is how we're writing about this. These 4 words are in no way the only words to highlight or use, but these are some representative examples that we see being important. One of those is using the word you, right? Bonus points also for mail merging in their name at certain times. But the more we're saying, not that we need people to give today, we need donors to give, we need the community to give, we want to say we need you to give, right? And even though it sounds like, and a lot of these may sound like small semantics, they actually make a big difference in people feeling kind of motivated and persuaded to actually personally give, when especially reading an email appeal, for instance. True in a letter as well, but especially over email. So using you, using names, making it feel like it's directly to them. The second one is the word because, and that may feel like a weird word to put in here on a list of some of the more persuasive words to use in your appeal. The thing with because is even if folks disagree with the statement you're saying, they disagree with actually the because reason that you're giving, by reading the word, they actually feel like subconsciously there's a logical argument being made. So just by you saying, we need to prioritize youth education because X, Y, or Z, even if they do or do not agree with it, even if they do or not read that last part, because they read that linking word, they feel like there's a logical argument being made. So using that a couple times, we obviously don't want to overuse any of these, but using that a couple times throughout can help people really think there's a really strong flow and reasoning behind why they should give. The word join, and I will say out of the 3 of these, this is probably one that's been co-opted or used the most, so we might need to think of a different synonym here, get up with the source. But basically it's saying using donate or give a lot of times is no longer as effective as it once was. And I will say there's been enough of a shift away from it. You can get there a little bit again, but a lot of donors don't want to see themselves as donors anymore. They want to see themselves as supporters. And in their mind, that's very different. A donor is just an ATM that gives you out of their wallet. A supporter supports you in all ways. One way is financial. And more, especially younger donors, we're seeing want to be supporters, not donors. So words like join, take part, participate, give over donate, support is another one we see kind of along with join. But the less transactional we make the ask, the more likely they are to give these days. And then finally, this last one's really a placeholder. It doesn't have to be the word instantly. It could be urgently. It could be today, this week. But give some type of timing on it, right? Saying that like we need you to give this week because X, Y, or Z, right? We want to add some urgency there because if we leave it open-ended, folks are either A, going to come back to it when they have time, which is never, or B, they're going to read another appeal that does add that urgency and go with that one because that one has to be done today. Yours can be done anytime, right? So I want to make sure there's some urgency in the appeal as well. We're making it time bound in the language that we're using. A couple other language tips there. Just really thinking about, those examples again are just a couple examples of the many that are out there. That what words are we using and how can we make sure they're as powerful as possible? We really want emotional, emotive, descriptive language that's going to elicit a response there. We want to focus in our appeal with our language on some future focus, right? So folks give not as a reward for what we've done, but as an investment in what we will do. So we're talking about the past only enough that it convinces people we're good at what we're doing and we're making a big difference. And then we really want them giving because they're thinking about how can they be a part of that difference we make moving forward. So make sure in our appeals and the language that we're using, there's a focus on the future as well. This is more for any individual kind of one-on-one conversations we're having, but also true even when we're writing the ums and the uhs, right? When we're talking verbally, but when we're thinking about writing, we may not be writing ums and uhs into our letters and emails, right? But there's often language we're using in there that doesn't need to be there. So really read through sentence by sentence in our letter, email, social media post, and think about, are there any words here that don't need to be here, right? Can I make this sentence shorter and it still convey the message I'm trying to? In most cases, there's going to be quite a bit we can actually take out. We're used to writing in these kind of very verbose ways. At end of year, there's so much email going out. The more concise we can be, the better. And then finally, we want to use nouns, not verbs. And what we mean by that is, again, reinforcing that identity piece. So saying that, instead of that you're supporting, you're a supporter. Really making sure that they feel like they are the thing we're giving them the identity of. Third tip here about gaining trust. This is just really highlighting the fact that, especially if we're doing an appeal to prospects, to folks we don't know very well or haven't given before, we need to be realistic that there's a lot of distrust in the sector. 1 out of 3 folks distrust nonprofits overall. 40% of people think we spend our money poorly, right? And we mismanage our money. And a lot of this, again, has nothing to do with small nonprofits or any of the organizations on this caller that we typically work with. Most of this is just the eroding trust in the public sector. So things that are happening in government, politics, at international NGOs, right? Big national nonprofits, a lot of those scandals that get reported, right? Trickle down to impact the trust in community-based organizations also. So it's really important that we think about this going in. We're thinking about how we're building that trust with our audience, because we can't assume people are just going to say, oh, you're doing education work, that's great, education's awesome, we're going to give to you, right? There's some level or some lack of trust there that we want to make sure we're aware of so we can address in our appeal. The biggest things we can do here to address this, thinking about our credibility, thinking about how we show the impact that we've made, and the more recent, more specific impact we can show is the fastest way to cut through this trust thing, right? If someone doesn't trust you, but you can quickly tell them a story or share a couple stats, or better yet, both, about impact you've had in the last 6 to 12 months, pretty quickly they get on board with what you're doing. So that impact and that story is going to be really important to share. And then the fourth tip here is about the pitch itself, right? And the angle we're taking in the pitch. There's obviously a lot of ways to talk about our work and a lot of ways we could try to engage donors in it. But we see donors are typically motivated by 4 things, right? And most donors have one of these as a primary motivator and then a second one as a secondary. If we're talking to one donor, right, we're having a pitch with a major donor, we want to think through which of these 4 is probably their primary, which is their secondary. But especially if we're sending out an email campaign, a fundraising letter via direct mail, across our hundreds, thousands of donors, we're going to have folks that are each one of these is a motivator for them. So we want to make sure we're tapping into all 4 of these across our letters. So we'll talk about each of these in kind here in a second, but going quickly through this GIVE acronym about the 4 motivations for donors. Game plan. So these are folks that give because they know you're going to get the job done. They care about the logistics, they care about the qualifications of your team, and they want to know how you're going to get out there in the community and do the work you're saying you're going to do. So they're giving because they think it's a wise investment. There's folks that are giving because of the information, the facts and stats, right? They are acting like social impact investors. They are buying impact with their donation. We see this increasingly true for younger donors, and they are folks that are going to be motivated by knowing you're making a difference and wanting to be part of it. The third motivation we see for donors here, vision. These are folks that care about that long-term focus, right? That big pie in the sky that we're working towards. We want to make it clear why we're doing the work for these folks, right? because they want to give because they're investing in that long-term future. And finally, emotion, right? The personal appeal. These are folks that are giving because of the stories and the impact we have on people, and are going to be most motivated by those personal stories. So game plan, diving a little deeper into it here. This is, again, persuading someone to give because we have a well thought out plan and we're qualified to do it, right? These are folks that, again, want to give to people they think are going to be able to get the job done and make the difference in the community they're planning to. So how this works, these are folks that are going to want to know a lot of your programmatic details. They want to know how you're going to do the work. And they're often going to ask you questions like, where's my donation go, right? What's your experience or background with this work? How do you develop your curriculum? How do you execute your programs? How do you find the people in your programs? Any of that kind of process-based questioning is going to indicate to you this donor is probably a game plan person. This is the motivation we see least often, but still pretty significantly out there. So we want to make sure we're tapping into this. When we think about these 4 motivations, we'll talk about the other 3 here in just a second. What this means for our fundraising email or interview appeal is we want to tap into each one of these at least a little bit. And we often are doing probably 1 or 2 of these automatically because it's how we ourselves are motivated. So it's really important to look at which one of these resonates most with me, and am I tapping into the other ones? Nonprofit staff, not surprisingly, are most motivated by the emotion one that we'll talk about here in a minute. When we do this kind of polling activity with nonprofit staff, that's usually at least half, if not 2/3 of the room, but that's not necessarily true of our donor audience. So we want to make sure that we're tapping into all 4 of these, not just one of these. Providing information, these are folks, again, that connect via info and facts. They want to support because they know you've shown that kind of quote unquote proof of concept, right? You've had good success before, so they're going to invest in you having good success again. They're going to ask you a lot of impact questions, right? How many clients do you serve? Do you have any stats, graphs to show your impact? How do you measure impact? How do you think about the difference you make? So we want to make sure we have some stats and stories in there for them, so they see that kind of quantitative approach to how we're thinking about our work. And even the qualitative stories, if really tangible, can also motivate these donors. Our vision, this is the 3rd motivator. These are folks, again, that are connecting via our long-term goal. So they want to hear, that kind of big pitch about, we're working towards an equitable education system in our city. Here's how we're doing that on the ground today, right? But they really want to get behind that kind of big picture. They often also are going to be motivated by a really kind of charismatic and engaging leader or fundraiser that they're talking to. So these are going to be the donors that really connect to you personally as well. They're going to ask you a lot of questions about, how did the organization get founded? Why do you all start this work? What's your X number of year plan? Where do you want to see the program go next? All those things are going to indicate to you this is a donor or donor audience that really cares about that direction and that vision. And then finally, emotions, right? So this, again, is the one that most resonates often with nonprofit staff that we talk to. And again, the one that we really want to tap into, because this is a powerful one for the majority of donors out there, and usually is, if not primary, or secondary for a lot of people. At the same time, it's not for everyone. So because it's the primary for so many nonprofit staff, we really want to be careful that our fundraising appeals are not just this, because they definitely can be. If I write a fundraising letter without thinking about my audience, I naturally am going to write one that I find motivating, right? By the time I finish my appeal, I'm going to read it over and be like, oh, I should donate to that nonprofit. They sound great. But the goal isn't that I motivate myself, it's that I motivate my audience. So I want to tap into this one, but also be careful it's not the only thing we're doing. This one, it's persuading someone to support, right? Because that personal connection, that empathetic connection. So this is going to be people who are asking about examples, success stories. They're going to be telling you about their own life, right, and how it relates. They might ask questions personally about you, but they really want to know kind of, how is this actually impacting people beyond the stats. I'll end here with a couple of quick next steps, then pause for any questions you all have. First is just really looking at the wording of your end of year appeal if you have it drafted or if you're drafting it, and really think about what stands out right now to you. So what words stand out to you? What identities do you think you're tapping into and not tapping into right now? And which of those 4 motivators we just talked about do you think are present in your appeal, and which could maybe be highlighted a little bit more? Secondly, thinking about your audience, right? So again, any large audience is probably going to have, all 6 of those identities and all 4 of those motivators included, but to different ratios. So thinking about who your audience is might help you understand kind of which of those to prioritize. Want to make sure our pitch is really active, talking about things we're doing, not just things we've done. Really want to invite donors in as a partner, right, as a change agent, so they feel kind of centered in the story. Want to make sure we're talking to a specific audience and not trying to get everyone to give. We want to focus on who our primary audience is. And then finally, always helpful this time of year to look at some of those other pitches and appeals you're going to get in your inbox and see what other themes that people are talking about. So that's going to be helpful for you when planning. So here I'll pause for questions you all have. Someone had a question about what tips as well as kind of cautions do you have regarding the use of photos in your appeal? That's a really great point. We talked a lot about language today, but I will say part of this appeal and part of the identity and emotion we can tap into is also the visual aspect of our appeal as well, right? And photos are a big part of that. And an email campaign, definitely including at least one photo in the email. Even for direct mail, we sometimes see some photos included either on the letter or separately. And obviously for any type of digital outreach on social, etc., Giving Tuesday, we're going to be using a lot of visual appeal. The tips I would say are really focusing on photos that, again, make you feel something. Pictures that have 2 or less people as the primary subject are going to be the most engaging for folks, especially if there's eye contact in the photo. If it's a landscape photo, or if you're a nature organization, you're highlighting an environmental photo, having one kind of central focus to it, it's going to be important. And the only caution I would say is that it doesn't have to be overly produced. Things that feel authentic get a lot more engagement these days than things that feel professionally done. So even if you have a professional photographer doing your photos, trying to make it feel authentic, feel real is going to be important there. Any other questions folks have before we wrap up today? All right, great. Well, we'll send out the slides and recording shortly afterwards, and thank you all for joining.